Hello. Thank you for joining us for what is, at the moment at least, the inaugural YouTube video for Project Story Machine. Project Story Machine is an interdisciplinary, cross-institutional research project funded by the AHRC and DFG, and we are aiming with it to facilitate greater access and deeper exploration of the folk tales of Germany and the UK through the creation of an interactive digital infrastructure called StoryMachine. And this first video is a version of the introduction to the project in a paper given by myself, Anna Milon, and Sabine Slowik at the International Society for Contemporary Legend Research Perspectives on Contemporary Legend Conference. My name is Anna. I am a research associate on the project based at the School of Advanced Studies at the University of London, and I predominantly deal with the folklore side of things. I also design and run focus groups for testing our software, our digital creation on the English side. I completed my PhD at the University of Exeter with a thesis titled The Horned God in Modern Paganism, Fantasy Fiction and Live-Action Roleplay, which is currently, which is on the route to becoming a book with Bloomsbury Academic. And before joining Project Story Machine, I was involved in the AHRC-funded project on Lincolnshire folktales at Nottingham Trent University.
Thank you, Anna. And my name is Sabine Slowik, and I'm a research assistant for the project at the Department of Interdisciplinary and Multiscalar Area Studies at the University of Regensburg on the German side. On the project, I'm mostly responsible for the identification of data sources for generating machine knowledge and conducting empirical studies. I hold a bachelor's degree in Japanese studies and a master's degree in comparative European ethnology. And my research so far is based on ethnographic and qualitative methods and has explored the representation of history in digital games, as well as urban identity constructions through intangible cultural heritage. And currently, my work focuses on digital folklore and ethnographic approaches to contemporary narrative practices with a focus on virtual communication spaces.
Magnificent. And without further ado, here we go. Hello, everyone. We are here to introduce StoryMachine, an interactive digital tool for exploring folktales of Germany and the UK, using the case study of an overlooked English folktale. Project StoryMachine is an interdisciplinary research project funded by the AHRC and DFG that brings together researchers from 3 institutions in the UK and 3 in Germany. And you can see them all on screen. Turns out you can't. There we go. The team of Hof is responsible for the technical development of the system. The researchers at Ludwig-Maximilians-Universität in Munich are investigating the psychological perspective of the human-computer interaction within StoryMachine. The University of Regensburg, the University of London, the University of the Arts London, as well as the University of Hertfordshire are all responsible for conducting the empirical studies and contributing perspectives from the fields of folkloristics, narrative studies, and digital humanities. Our key aim is to facilitate greater access to and deeper engagement with folk tales for educators, creatives, heritage professionals, and the general public. And we hope to demonstrate what that can look like through the example of the Shepherd's Grave folktale. In The Lore of the Land, Jennifer Westwood and Jacqueline Simpson describe a lost landmark of the Chiltern Hills, known as the Shepherd's Grave, located in the parish of Aston Clinton in Buckinghamshire. The authors speculate that the landmark may have been a barrow, so a prehistoric burial mound, with an inscription cut into the turf, and reproduce its legend as given in an 1854 source. They attribute the loss of the grave to a not-so-respectful local farmer who ploughed it out. Very little else can be gleaned about the landmark from 21st century sources, illustrating how easily storied landscapes can lose the tales associated with them. The story is out of oral circulation. The location it is connected to is inaccessible because it is on private property, And so the tale of the shepherd's grave becomes an isolated curio rather than a story connected to the wider narrative landscape of folklore. This is but one example of how gaps open up in folklore where a tale stops being linked to a wider folkloric corpus. Another example comes from Lincolnshire, also in the UK, where Ethel Rutkin records the story of Bayard's Leap, a tale of how a man and his trusty horse Bayard put an end to a witch who terrorizes the neighborhood. The story is initially associated with the hamlet of Bayard's Leap in the south of the county, but Rutkin notes in her diary that the tale was told as far as Willerton, some 34 miles north of Bayard's Leap. However, she does not record the Willerton variant, and now we have no way of finding out what it could have been. These are just two examples of the challenges inherent in conventional folklore archives. Lack of context, lack of access, and the erasure of the folk, the storytellers themselves, are well-noted concerns among folklorists. As far back as 1947, A. Irving Hallowell writes, and I quote, "While it has been customary over a long period to collect a representative sample of oral narratives of the people that they, the folklorists, happen to be studying, it is an open secret that once recorded, very little subsequent use may be made of such material. Indeed, these archival collections, once published, often moulder on our shelves, waiting for the professional folklorist to make use of them in a dim and uncertain future." And so, this is the kind of trend that we're hoping to address with StoryMachine. But first, the tale of the shepherd himself. Aston Hill, a chalky, lofty eminence commanding a wide and picturesque view of the surrounding country, is described by a contributor to the records of Buckinghamshire in 1854 as the final resting place of a godly shepherd. This shepherd, called Faithful, grew so enamored with the location where he often rested while tending his master's flock that he requested to be buried there. This request was honored, and an epitaph was carved into the mound in which he was interred, which goes something like this: "Faithful lived and faithful died, faithful shepherd on the hillside. The field so wide, the hill so round. In the day of judgment, he'll be found." The contributor also notes that the rustics of the neighborhood used carefully to keep the letters clear, but having for some time ceased to do so, the word faithful alone was legible when he saw it. The spot, however, was still held in reverence, and his guide narrated the story with grave solemnity. And this was about 1847, and the author opines that he's afraid the ground has since been ploughed over. This is the version of the story that Westwood and Simpson reproduce. But according to G. Elland, the day of judgment for the shepherd came in the late 1880s. Writing in 1923, Elland notes, "The ground was leveled about the time that the chalet was built, and some 3 or 4 feet of earth were removed from the shepherd's grave. Wishing to see whether there had been a burial there, the workmen dug a little deeper and found his skull quite perfect, together with other bones and the skeleton of his dog. There were nails from a coffin, but the wood entirely decayed. The bones were reinterred in the same spot." Elland also notes that at some point between 1847 and the grave's leveling, the entire epitaph was recarved. This gives us a more precise location: the area surrounding the chalet, a pleasure cottage built by Alfred the Rothschild in the style of an alpine chalet just uphill of his residence, Halton House. A history of Halton House by Andrew Adam corroborates the account that before the chalet was built, Alfred ordered the top of the hill leveled and the earthworks brought to light the bones of Faithful and his dog. Adam's history, Beechwoods and Bayonets, cites R. Chambers' The Book of Days, published in 1863, as its source for Faithful being an illiterate philosopher. And it also gives a verse which reads, "His head was silvered o'er with age, and long experience made him sage. In summer's heat, in winter's cold, he fed his flock and penned his fold. His wisdom and his honest fame through all the country raised his name." This is somewhat at odds with Elland's account, which holds that the shepherd was quite dishonest and rustled sheep from passing flocks. But still, a fairly cohesive story emerges of a shepherd who asked to be unconventionally buried on Aston Hill, whose grave and its inscription became a place of local regard. However, all the texts that we came across during this research that mention the shepherd's grave do so in isolation. There is no discussion of other unconventional burials around which folk tales sprung up, nor of a wider tradition of chalk figures, not even of a second burial mound at the bottom of Aston Hill.
Yes, thank you, Anna. The isolation that Anna has just described, the shepherd's grave floating free of any wider narrative context, disconnected from comparable tales, is one example of the critical challenges folklore archival practices face, which StoryMachine is seeking to address. The foundation for this digital folklore tool that could make this possible is the spatial hypertext-oriented recommender system, SPORE in short, which you can see here in a screenshot of an early prototype. SPORE is a component-based open hypermedia system, primarily developed and conceptualized by Klaus Atzenbeck and Daniel Rossner at Hof University in Germany, in collaboration with Sam Brooker at the University of the Arts London. It combines a personalizable recommendation system with spatial hypertext and was first introduced as quote-unquote a story-breaking machine. The term story-breaking is a borrowed term found primarily in the film and television industry, where it describes the collaborative process of dismantling a story and reassembling it from unexpected angles until something richer emerges. SPORE applies the same logic to archival folklore. For researchers, creatives, educators, and heritage professionals engaging with folktales, it can function both as a research aid and as a tool for provoking new lines of inquiry, a means not just of finding what you're looking for, but of discovering what you did not know you needed. Why does StoryMachine specifically employ spatial hypertext? Because it is a hypertext system with specialized spatiotemporal parsers that allow users to express implicit associations through spatial proximity and visual attributes, as you can see in the colored items like Snow White, Dwarf, and Beanstalk, placed in varying degrees of proximity to each other on the 2D grid. As you can see in the screenshot, the colored nodes are the materials a user has brought into their own context. The white nodes are the recommender system's personalized suggestions, positioned spatially in relation to what has already been assembled. But there is no hierarchy imposed from the outside.
Representing the Shepherd's Grave folktale as a hypertext artifact gives equal space to the story's variations. For instance, we have two possible starting points, that the shepherd is a rustic philosopher and that he is a bit of a scoundrel who steals sheep. Then both versions converge to tell us that he requested to be buried on Aston Hill and that his grave became a place of local regard. Then the story diverges again. The destruction of the mound on the orders of an aristocratic landowner and its destruction by a farmer have markedly different implications for the story's expression of class and land rights. Presenting them non-hierarchically allows for both versions to be held in tension.
So, with all this in mind, how could StoryMachine be applied to work in practice on our use case? I'd like to walk you through an interaction in the prototype on which the StoryMachine user interface will be based. It should be noted that what you're seeing is not yet the interface designed for end users, but the current working environment for developers and first user studies, a demonstration of the system's logic before the final design is applied. So on the platform, the user can browse the overview of existing workspaces and choose whether to create a new one or enter an existing one. For example, the one seen here named Shepherd's Grave. A toggle function allows users to set the workspace to private access or make it publicly available and jointly editable. Inside the workspace, the user can make use of the search function to explore a node or motif card with the narrative element of the Shepherd's Grave. When creating the card and bringing the Shepherd's Grave into this environment, the recommender system could then surface related folkloric materials from German-speaking and Anglophone communities, such as the Lonely Shepherd Viewpoint, Jay's Grave, and das Schäfergrab vom Pfaffengrün. The user can then select suggestions and navigate through active choice, drawing in and color-coding suggestions that speak to their inquiry, like the accounts of other unconventional burials, chalk landscape traditions, figures venerated by local communities. Rather than imposing a pre-existing structure, it invites users to arrange objects in space in such a way that the arrangement itself suggests connections. In doing so, users draw on their own non-verbalized tacit knowledge, the half-formed intuitions and experiential understanding that would otherwise be very difficult to capture or communicate. Suggestions that do not speak to the user's inquiry can be set aside. This is what makes SPORE particularly well-suited to the study of folklore, in which context, association, and the unarticulated knowledge of communities are as significant as any written record. But SPORE's more distinctive potential lies in serendipitous discovery, as seen here with the suggestion of Frederick Barbarossa. The recommendations do not simply confirm what we already sense, but break the story open in an unexpected direction. A connection between Shepherd Faithful and the Kyffhäuser tale type, the cultural hero asleep in a mountain, seems at first counterintuitive. What does a shepherd from Buckinghamshire share with Frederick Barbarossa, or even with King Arthur? And yet that incongruity is the point. It creates space for questions that no keyword search would surface. What makes a cultural hero? What conditions allow ordinary people to be remembered and elevated across generations? What does it tell us about class and land ownership that Shepherd Faithful was not remembered in that way? These are the provocations that send a researcher somewhere they had not planned to go. So, quote unquote, story breaking in action. The system's knowledge base is currently built from manually curated, motif-based entries structured around Stith Thompson's Motif Index of Folk Literature, the canonical cross-cultural classification of recurring narrative elements. These entries form the shared vocabulary through which SPORE reads users' input and connects it to the wider narrative landscape of folklore. As the project develops, the knowledge base will expand to include folkloric material with metadata drawn from international folkloric databases. The recommender engine will grow with it to provide a context-sensitive, AI-supported system that generates personalized suggestions drawn from folklore-specific knowledge bases, with user choices feeding back into the system and shaping what it recommends next. So StoryMachine does not tell you what to think, but rather tells you what you might think next. And with those provocations in view, I'll hand it back to Anna, who will show what emerges when you bring these wider connections to bear on the Shepherd's Grave tale itself.
Thank you very much, Sabine. Encountering the Shepherd's Grave in context allows for a deeper understanding and appreciation of this folktale. For instance, when compared to other chalk figures in the UK, the Shepherd's verse epitaph is more likely to be fiction rather than fact, as no other text chalk carvings are known before the 20th century. But if the inscription was there in some capacity, reading about the scouring of the Uffington White Horse and the White Leaf Cross may give us some idea about how the local community cared for it. Both are chalk figures in south of England, the former depicting a galloping horse, the second a cross sitting as if on the dome of a church. There are descriptions of both being scoured, cleared of weeds and algae, and renewed with freshly pounded chalk, dating back to at least the mid-18th century, and possibly much older. Comparison with other unconventional final resting places positions Shepherd Faithful as an outlier, who was not buried in unhallowed ground because of some misdeed. See, for instance, Jay's grave on Dartmoor in Devon, a small green mound and alleged final resting place of a young woman who committed suicide in the 1800s and was denied a Christian burial. Or the Lonely Shepherd or Peaky Stone near Abergavenny in South Wales, which is, according to legend, an abusive husband who drove his wife to drown herself and was subsequently turned into stone. The shepherd who, according to legend, has his grave in Tathengron, Saxony, was ordered to pasture his sheep on the neighboring community's land. For this transgression, the villagers killed him and buried him on the roadside. His grave marked with a rectangular stone with a rough carving of a cross on it. Unlike these three characters, Shepherd Faithful actually wanted to be buried where he was. StoryMachine's recommender system's aim is to also offer provocations that inspire the user to inquire further and examine their own expectations, as with the link between Shepherd Faithful and the Kyffhäuser folktale type, as described by Sabine. And it creates space for questions such as, how are cultural heroes created and what are their key attributes? What can folklore teach us about addressing class inequality? Are there circumstances in which Shepherd Faithful could have become a cultural hero, alongside with figures like King Arthur, Charlemagne, or Frederick Barbarossa? Finally, as an interactive tool, StoryMachine empowers its users to actively participate in the generation and dissemination of folklore. Quoting from Daniel Rossner and project members Klaus Atzenberg and Sam Brooker's paper on SPORE, combining recommender functionality with the ability of context creation supports the user's holistic thinking by allowing persistent user-generated context. This context can be analyzed by a recommender system, which then augments the space with additional information. The user may choose to pick relevant suggested items and add them to their own context. This forms an iterative process in which user and machine work together on creating a context that leads to a desired decision or a solution to a problem. The navigation of the workspace remains a series of choices, as opposed to the endless scroll of some other digital spaces that rely on recommender systems. Spatial hypertext presents information without a pre-existing hierarchy, enabling users to define their own parameters of desirability. Furthermore, StoryMachine retains user inputs and aggregates them. For example, if 100 users group the Shepherd's Grave Tale with Frederick Barbarossa, this will leave a trace in StoryMachine, a trace that future users will have access to. This way, a user does not only collaborate with the machine, they also encounter the ghosts of the users who came before them. And finally, the tool is currently in development, and we are reaching out to focus groups to test StoryMachine as it currently stands. We believe that the focus groups will provide valuable feedback for refining the direction of the tool's growth. If you're interested in taking part, please reach out to us on the socials on screen or via our emails. We look forward to taking you along with us on this journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.